Hi everyone, Elizabeth here. I wanted to follow up on this journal that I'm making for my upcoming trip to Sri Lanka. If you want to see how I actually made the cover of this journal and the decision process I made to come up with using a refillable travel journal, kind of like along the lines of a Midori traveler's journal, take a look at the video. I'll post the link down below. But here's where I am right now. So I've got the cover all set. I added a little bit of an embellishment to the cover. I think that came from an old piece of jewelry. And what I have in the journal right now is just that extra little notebook that I keep for adding personal notes. So I've kind of started talking or writing about the kind of places I want to go to, the UNESCO World Sites that are on the island that would be fun to go to, and then kind of outlining just here's an itinerary of the number of days I'm going to be there and kind of where I'm going to be going. Just starting the process. I'm heading out in a couple of weeks. But if you look at the video below, you'll notice or you'll see that I wanted to come up with inserts or signatures that were insertable and taken out. So what I've done is I've gone ahead and created some signatures that would go into this book, and let me show you what those look like. Okay, so here's what my signatures look like. I've made 4 of them. They're fairly identical in terms of the way they're put together. Some of the paper on the inside and the covers are obviously different. But I've made 4 of them, 1 for each week that I'm going to be there, although I might not use 1 per week. We'll see how that ends up flowing out or rolling out. Now, again, the problem I'm trying to solve is this. Usually when I make a travel journal, I bind my signatures together, right? A signature is just one of these things as a standalone unit. So when I bind them together and I put them in a cover of some sort, so let's say I was to use this cover, that's how thick the journal is from at the start of the book, and it only gets thicker as I add things to it. Now, while that's so cool to look at the end of a trip, it is a pain to be traveling with a book that is this thick and just getting fatter, right? I do not leave my journal in the hotel room. I take it with me everywhere I go. So it goes on buses with me and to museums and, everywhere I'm walking around. And this gets pretty heavy. So the problem I'm looking to solve is instead of carrying all of these together, because I'm not really using all of them at the same time. None of us are. When you travel, you are not using every one of these pages at once. So the idea is to only use 1 signature at a time in this cover, right? That's what I would travel with. And when I'm done, take that out and then go work on the next signature. So when I'm working on signature number 2, number 1's nice and fat and filled and sitting in the hotel room, not giving me a backache as I schlep around with it. So I basically covered each one of these with wallpaper samples. I took a look at the stash I had and just picked a couple of covers or papers that looked good to me. And let me walk through one of them in detail because they pretty much all look the same. On the inside, they have slightly different papers in some cases, but you'll get the idea of what these look like before I go on a trip. This is about as much work as I get done before I leave. The rest of what happens to these signatures will happen on the trip or as finishing touches when I get home. This is what each signature basically looks like. It's about 9 inches long by about 6 inches wide. Now again, that tends to be a standard size that I really like. It's at the 9 by 12 pads or paper that you would get folded in half. Okay, so that's kind of the signature size that I find works really well for me, travels easily, and is not too big or too small for the kind of things that I like to do, right? Goldilocks. This is my Goldilocks size. It's the just right size that I have found in my journals. So again, as I said, the paper on the outside is basically watercolor paper. I back it with a bit of construction paper from the kids' supply store, and it just gives it a little bit of sturdiness to the cover, but not a heck of a lot. This is basically a soft cover. I'm solving that problem by sticking it, remember, in this book, which is the hardcover on the front and the back. So there are pockets on the inside, front, and on the back. Okay, so as I'm traveling and collecting stuff, my ephemera will fit in there until I have a chance to use them. Now, What I've done is I've basically used various papers that I had basically from my stash. This is stuff that I had, created a long time ago, watercolor paper, and I just kind of like the idea with the sun kind of going to the Isle of Serendip. That's working for me. Leaving a cold November and December in New England and heading to some sunny beaches is what I was thinking about. So that's kind of what's on the outside. You'll notice that I just add ephemera. I can't remember some trip that was from that I just kind of stick them on. Construction paper, I kind of like this from the kitty department store. I think I'll make a video on making a kid's journal later on this weekend that will show you some of the, the name brand of this particular kind of paper. But it's a good way to just have some paper that's not white staring at you to start out with. This is watercolor paper. I tend to write a lot in my journals, but it's also nice sturdy paper that I can take my watercolors supplies with me and do some sketching or painting on it. A bit of scrapbook paper, some writing paper. Again, there's that star stamp, the sun stamp that I really like, that I'm looking forward to. Some ephemera that I just basically stitched on the bottom of that page. I think this is from a very, very old set of flags of the nations of the world. Some of those nations don't exist anymore, so that's part of the fun. I like using craft brown paper. I found that I really like how those are to write on when I'm traveling. So you can use either craft paper, or if you don't happen to have craft paper, brown paper bags from your grocery store will work just as well. Some leftover remnants of scraps. Again, some ephemera that I have. Another sheet of watercolor paper. Here's a bit of scrapbook paper that a 12 by 12 that I cut in half. So you're basically looking at a 6 by 12, so that's 6 by 6 on one side. Some of the scrapbook papers come in packaging, and that's some of the packaging that I ended up cutting up and using up. Again, some scrapbook paper with one of my elephant stamps that are really fun. I don't remember where this paper came from, but anyway, some papers that are sitting around in my stash. I've got some scrapbook paper on the side. I tend to do a lot of writing, so again, there's some writing paper, some ephemera stuck on. Now these are pockets. My turkey journal has them. Basically every travel journal I make has them. I tend to stamp on them or put stickers on them, and if you decide to stamp them with Stays-On ink, because that will not run. You could also use acrylic. It takes a little longer to dry, but it won't run if you stamp on, anything water-based is going to smear and will run right off your hands. Trust me on this one. I speak from experience. So what I do here is I decide to have more full-length pages. So these are your basic 8.5 by 11 what are they called? Pocket page protectors. Okay, so you pick them up from the office supply store. If you do anything at all that's scrapbooking based, or have worked in any of the offices back in the day when we had a lot of paper flying around, you've got a stash of these sitting around. So what I do is I just trim off the holes, because there's no need to have them, and then I stitch up, the sides that I end up cutting. So it's open only on the top, and things get slid in there. Okay, I just stitch that side with some wallpaper, and the bottom is still sealed. So there's one of those. Another bit of scrapbooks page. Another watercolor paper. So here's the center of my spine, center of the signature. Okay, so that's kind of how it looks like before it gets started. And on the other side, or the other half of the signature, are basically just those same pages flipped over the other way. Just flip through those so you can see them. So you'll notice that I don't do a lot of pre-painting necessarily, or put a lot of stuff into making the papers or the book ready ahead of time, other than maybe some stamping, maybe some ephemera, deciding what kinds of paper I want in them. I know from experience I really like writing paper. I love craft paper. Scrapbook paper is always fun, but my absolute favorite is watercolor paper, right? The cheaper watercolor paper you can buy at Michael's or any discount art supply store. I find the cheaper it is, the better. It loses that preciousness of, oh my gosh, I don't want to mess up that paper. Okay, so those work really well. And then here we go. Here's the end of that particular signature. That's one. There's 3 more that look very similar. Okay, slightly different pages, slightly different scrapbook paper that might be in them, but they're essentially exactly the same thing. So for example, that's a difference in the scrapbook paper, but it's the same layout. I tend to like having very similar pages in terms of how the books are structured when I'm traveling, or each signature is structured. So the way this would work is this. So here's my first signature, here's the book. Now remember, in the earlier video I had said you could put as many as 3 signatures into this one, but I'm going to be traveling with just one at a time, one signature plus my notebook. So you open it up to the middle, you open up any one of these elastic cords. In this case I'm just going to pick the middle one randomly, which is probably the one I will use. Stick that in. Whoops, excuse me while I hit the tripod there. Stick that in. It stays on like that, and we're good to go. So when I'm traveling on any given day, this is all I'm carrying with me. Okay, it's going to have the one signature in it, which can add all sorts of stuff too, and then this little notebook that will probably stay in this traveler's journal the entire time I'm on the trip, just as I take notes and things like that. So when any signature is done or full, I just take it right out and stick the next one in. It's that simple. I am so excited to use it. If you remember, the elastic cord basically just snugs around like that and holds everything in place. I'm very excited to try this out and see how it works. I'm so loving the thinner form factor of a journal that I take with me. Like I said, I really love fat journals, but I don't like traveling with fat journals as much, especially when I'm moving around a lot. If you're in one place, it tends to maybe be a little easier, but I'm going to be moving quite a bit, and that becomes a pain. And I will probably put all 4 signatures together in some binding way when I get back to kind of make the Sri Lanka journal. I haven't gotten that far in what I'm going to do next, but I figure step A, go on the trip, fill the journals, fill the signatures out, and then see how I combine them later. That's what I have so far. Stay tuned for what they look like when I come back from the trip. I'll keep you posted on that. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments down below, and I'll talk to you soon. Thanks for watching.